right, well, welcome everyone to the DoD Contract Academy podcast. Once again, I'm here with Dr. Kizzy Parks. Hey, Kizzy, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing today?
Good, good. Well, thanks for coming back on. I know, you've been on before, and I've talked to you on YouTube, on your channel. And if you guys haven't checked out Kizzy, I mean, she is, especially on YouTube, but social media, she does a really good job of getting the message out there and helping people. So if anyone is looking for any information, is there a handle or something they should go to at your YouTube channel? Or?
You can look up Kizzy Parks. Look for that. I'm going to come up. I have blonde hair, but go to that one. You'll say Kizzy Parks. You see all my shorts in my long form video.
Oh yeah, no, it's really cool because it's entertaining and it's real information. So, well, awesome. I love talking to you and watching your information because I feel like you have two perspectives that are really good. One is you're selling to the government. You've done it. You're doing it. You understand what the process is. And I know you have some specializations there. And we talked about services and relationships and stuff, but you also help people sell to the government, right? And I find it to be what you're doing is different and complementary to the types of things that we do here. And I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about that, how you're helping people. And then maybe we can pivot into, what you're doing on the government side. And, I think whether it's services or something else, maybe some people will get some good takeaways on what you're currently doing, hearing about your efforts.
Yeah, I think that's awesome.
Great. Cool. So let's talk about how you're helping businesses right now. What are the types of things that you're focusing on with your clients, and what do people come to you for?
They come for everything, where there's those who are like, hey, I heard about government contracting. I want to get into this space. I don't even know what I need to do. And then there are those who maybe they've won 1 or 2 or 3 contracts and they're like, I don't really know if I can repeat this. I may need help with like invoicing. And then there are those who also are interested in buying government contracting companies. And then lastly, there are those who have subcontracted, but they may not have ever received any kind of prime contracts.
Okay, interesting. So kind of four buckets there for people to look into. We've talked a lot on the podcast about subcontracting and priming. We haven't talked a lot about buying companies that have government contracts. I'm guessing that's where you're going with that, right? So what are some of the things that you have to look out for there, and why would you want to do that?
It's the easiest barrier to entry.
Yeah.
It is. Like, the barrier to entry is so low as long as you do your due diligence. So what's important to look for is, number one, you need to be able to go through their contracts. Mm-hmm. So like, for instance, there's a student who is looking to buy a particular kind of company. And I know the business model really well. It's janitorial.
Right.
And so it seemed bright and shiny to this person because they didn't know. Right. And I gave them some things to look into and to inquire about, because often the margins are low, or you're using 1099. You're going to have like 80 contracts to really have a multi-million-dollar business. And there's a lot going on, and one contract may be for 1 cleaning a week, and another contract could be for 7 cleanings a week, right? So you got to really understand the margins, the type of contracts, all of these things. And so, as time went on, she decided not to purchase that particular business. But regardless of the type of business, it's still super important to do the due diligence, because it's more than just profit with this. It's what kind of contracts do they really have?
Right.
Or contract vehicles.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, there is definitely a lot. I always say that because companies, especially that haven't sold anything, focus so much on, hey, how do I win that first contract? The real work begins once you're on contract with the government, right? So depending on, your specialty and the types of contracts there could be a lot of work managing the contract, managing expectations, making sure you're fulfilling your side of the bargain, right? And hitting all the FAR clauses that are involved. So No, definitely a lot there. And I mean, although from what you said, I mean, I always think it's interesting, like just janitorial services. Most people aren't really thinking, hey, the government buys janitorial services, yet it's it's billions of dollars that the government spends on janitorial services. There's a lot of buildings there that need work.
Yeah, I mean, facilities management is like one of the top NAICS that the government spends money on. So they need it. It's just that you need a lot of that kind of work.
Sure.
If you're really wanting to take it to the moon, but you may just want to take it to the next county near you. Yep. And you may only need 5 or 10 of these, but the point is there's tons. There's tons of janitorial work out there.
No, you're right. And it's one of those industries where you can take it really far if that's what you want. Or like because people come to me probably similar to the types that come to you of all genres, right? And I used to be a challenge for me to see if I could find something that the government actually didn't buy. But we were looking at, I had a documentary film company as a client at one point, and they were interested just, hey, does the government even buy what we sell? And, what we looked at was, well, hey, there aren't $20 million contracts typically falling out of the sky for documentary filmmakers, but that's not what they were interested in. They were interested in like the $50,000, $150,000 projects that could pop through. And that's what we found, right? So it was smaller contracts in government speak, right? But that's the supplemental income, the additional customer that they were interested in getting. So made it pretty interesting. So, and another thing is, and I don't know if they come to you for this, but since you brought up buying companies, a lot of companies are small businesses that want to sell their company, right, as part of their retirement plan. They would love to have a government contract or two on there because that increases the value of your business. Have you encountered any of that? I see you nodding your head, so you're clearly aware that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people that do that are seeking some type of government avenue as they get close to retiring, or they have a company and they want to sell it. That's their exit plan for retirement. Mm-hmm. Definitely see it. It just kind of varies as far as what it looks like.
I just smiled because I saw your KizWiz license plate in the background.
Oh, yes.
Pretty cool. I don't think there's too many Kizzys on YouTube. Maybe there's a few, but when I type in Kizzy, you come in right away. So,
well, thank you. And then it became, then Kizzy is now like, it's become a slang word.
Oh, really? What does it stand for? Hopefully something
Which
good.
Is quite funny. So one of the popular slang words out right now is like cap, right? Like you're lying. Like, and so somebody made a song about no Kizzy. So like Kizzy means lying or something.
Oh, no.
I was like, oh, it's just, but it's cute. I find it so cute though, because there's like a DJ Kizzy Rock, and then where my name originated from in Roots, and then to see it like now it's in like rap songs. I just think it's so cool. Like it's like every 10 years there's like
coming around.
It keeps coming around. I think it's super cool.
It's awesome. Well, it's definitely unique and everyone remembers you. So that's cool. And by the way, I'll leave our first interview in the show notes. Do you want to maybe we could have started off with a quick introduction. I'm assuming everyone listens to every episode, so they already but
they better.
Maybe we could give a quick, how you started and how you came to be doing what you're doing now.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could say it was like I had a business plan and I went to my SBA and I got into government contracting. That is not how I started at all. I was a graduate research fellow at Patrick Space Force. And it's funny because even when I was there, I didn't even realize that I was like on a subcontract. Just looking back, it's so funny, like all these things that were going on. And I just was like, do in the clouds, like had no idea what was happening around me. So basically, I was part of this summer researcher's pot of money that was set aside for him. And he was connected to a school in Tennessee. Mm-hmm. And so then they brought me in to their research department to help them with basically anything. Like they let me just go loose because this particular agency is Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute. They're all about race relations and readiness and helping equal opportunity advisors and specialists and all of that. So I was just there like counting down the days until I became Dr. Parks and like got my big girl job and all of those things. So I was like, oh, this is cool. I get paid every 2 weeks from this obscure school in Tennessee, and I'm going to find my big girl job. And then before you knew it, the director of research approached me one day and was like, oh, I heard you're graduating soon. And I was like, he even knows who I am. I was like, what is going on? He's like, I want to keep you on as a contractor. And I was like, okay. And then I threw out this number because he was like, how much is it going to cost me? And I was like, yes. And then he was excited. He's like, my assistant will contact you. And I was like, oh, I guess I got a job or something. So out the gate, this was 15 years ago, I was basically a subcontractor to a prime who I think they might have been or may be service disabled. I know they're out of Virginia. Mm-hmm. And I was doing basically the same thing that I was doing as a grad student. It's just that I took that opportunity, and this is really important. I made the decision that I was going to just run with it. I didn't look at it like, oh, okay, great. I can do this. And then maybe I can become a government employee, because I did start to notice that.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important for your listeners, because not everybody wants to be an entrepreneur.
Sure.
And it's okay if you don't, and just realize that being a contractor or subcontractor is a nice way to get a government job. I'm just going to put it like that. It's a great way to get a government job.
It is.
Because they will start to know, like, and trust and fall in love with you. Mm-hmm. And so then that started to happen. Like, they were kind of like, oh, do you want to apply for this GS-13? And I was like, no, I want a job. I'm growing this. So I made that decision. I was like, I'm going to take this and make it as big as possible. So I ended up getting a business address. I took advantage of all the free opportunities. I made so many mistakes. And I took it from just me in like this diversity and inclusion, really tight niche, and expanded into staffing, professional services, IT. And so today, K Parks Consulting has about 100 team members all over the United States. And we have 4 joint ventures. I've like added 2 more since I last talked to you. It's insane.
That is crazy.
And so it's been a whirlwind, not just because of the growth, the learning, as well as this life is nothing I could have ever expected, ever. I had no idea it would have this impact on me, going from, days where I lived in this apartment. I always would call it my studio apartment. My friend was like, Kizzy, it's an efficiency. And my bed came out of the wall, and
awesome.
I wasn't sure how I was going to like pay my bills, to going from that to like, now I'm like, oh, I'm going to Hawaii for 10 days to brainstorm. I mean, it's really all because of the space of government contracting. Yeah. So it's an amazing place. We serve all types of agencies, defense, federal, and one of my favorite types of projects, I love religious staffing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That is
my favorite.
That in and of itself is an interesting niche, because you, as I mentioned, like, as I was challenged to like go find like different things, someone's like, hey, does the government pay like piano players or guitar players? And the answer is yes. And usually it's for like religious staffing type stuff, right? And priests and pastors. And there's a whole piece that goes into that. Well, that's interesting. And that is a great niche, because I love it too, because you're helping people on the base, right? That, I'm guessing that's where most of the religious staffing is going to be, is probably on military bases. But you've got people doing a hard job, and they need that support. So that's very cool. Was that something from the beginning, or did you just discover that kind of recently or halfway through?
I discovered it through my friend and colleague, David, who I interview on my channel. He's such a hustler. I met him in 2019, and he lives like 40 blocks north of me.
Okay.
And he found me, and this is another kind of strategy out there. Put yourself on every type of subcontract list. He came across some subcontract lists, and he's like, I found you on here and you're close to me. So I called, and I was like, okay. And we met for like lunch. And he started to share how he basically has set his company up where he bids on low-hanging fruit, and one of the areas happened to be religious services. And I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea that this was even an area. And then he started talking about kosher potato chips and translation and court reporting. And I was like, whoa. And so that really changed things, because before, all of the different individuals and companies who served as my mentor, they took more of a, okay, we get a contract, we have these people, they're doing the thing, that's what we're doing. And it was pretty much similar. Simulation, IT, like no one was bidding on religious services. So when I started to hear that, and I was like, well, man, I'm missing out. I need to do this. And so lo and behold, started doing it. And now we have 6.
Oh, that's awesome.
We have 6 people in different, I know, it's in different positions for religious reasons.
Yeah. In different locations and stuff. So you're able to, I guess, for anyone listening that's involved with services, so, or thinking about it, so you're able to, you're not just bidding on contracts that are local to you. You have the ability to hire somebody in a different state to do the job if you win the contract, right? And then you manage them through your business. That's really interesting. And I think you also brought up another great point, which is, and I'll tie it into the research, which is always what I start with people is, hey, the first step is, does the government buy what you sell, right? All the information is public. But then the next 25 steps are, okay, well, let's take the area. If you're in legal services, let's take a look at, not because you can, I think there's over 300 parameters that have to be published for each contract. So depending on what tool you're using, you can break that down and see, okay, it might be the Department of Justice that's spending most of the money, right? And it is over $1 billion. I can't remember, 1 point something over the past 2 or 3 years. But now we can look at, okay, how much of that is small business contracts? And maybe it's half or a third of that. Okay, what niches now is that money being spent on? So we can start taking that down and go, okay, court recorder, and then there's some other court-related, there's advising, there's legislative services that are performed by lawyers and whatnot. But you can start looking at how many bids these are receiving, if it's reported on average. So now if I take one type of service and they're getting over 70 bids per solicitation on average, but I see something like court reporting and it's getting like 2 or 3, well, now that gives you without even leaving your desk, you could start getting an idea of where the least competition is going to be, and they're still spending money, right? So they might not be spending as much money there, but if there's not as much competition, and you can look at, hey, if I'm service disabled, are they giving those contracts to SDVOSB or woman-owned small business or 8A? And so that's a tremendous, I think, gift if you know how to do it, and opportunity, because really anyone can do it. You just go out and take a look at the information. So very cool, very cool. So is that your favorite thing to work on right now? Is the religious services, or do you like?
It is. I love the religious services. I love all kinds of staffing, but I just find the religious ones to be so intriguing, because some of them are in obscure places because that's where the base or the post is, or you never know. I also love it because it's super rewarding, where for some of the opportunities, the team members who end up joining our team, they may have been volunteers. So now they go from being a volunteer to being paid. Pretty much all these positions are part-time. So I really like that. We don't bid on priests, though, because there is a priest shortage.
Okay. Well, what type of positions are in the religious that you're working on? Can you share that? Or
yeah, I will, because some of them we don't bid on.
Yeah.
We're like, no, let's not do that. But so I've seen piano tuners, pianists, music directors, religious education, youth coordinator, Catholic parish, Protestant court. So usually they're Catholic and Protestant are the types of position, that's the religion, and then the type of position. Then they're also, I've seen rabbi openings, and these are all over the world.
Yeah.
So they're all over the world, and you don't have to practice these religions or be connected to a religious staffing company. There are religious staffing companies out there. I also discovered, I had no clue. But it doesn't mean you can't win. We won at, coincidentally at Patrick.
Okay.
Was the very first one, which is another strategy. Although I started out there one way, I kept in contact with the small business office, and they had an event where you could meet with contracting. And they had about 4 people from Patrick there, and 2 of us went, and we talked about our staffing capabilities. And one of the contracting officials in uniform asked, "Hey, I'm just curious, you talked about how well you all are at staffing. What about religious staffing?" And I was like, well, why not?
Yeah.
Exactly. And then we ended up winning a 1-year effort there. So it's never think that the relationship is dead if you have a relationship with a particular agency. But yeah, there's different types. Sometimes there's some random ones. The Navy often will have some interesting religious ones. There was some court. I don't think it was Department of State. It might have been under Department of Justice. It was very random and it made me uncomfortable. So we didn't bid. It was like they needed a religious person like in the courtroom or something. I was like, oh no, what if something goes crazy in the courtroom? And I was just like, no, that made me panic. And sometimes bureaus of prison. But the trick is, or my concern with bureaus of prison, normally the prison has a relationship with like a local organization.
Sure.
Yeah. So we don't bid on those.
That could make it a little bit more difficult to get in there. But I mean, look, just going to the SBA and meeting the SBA event and meeting the contracting officer, I mean, you're setting yourself apart from everybody else that doesn't go on these meetings. And it's, you mentioned it in the last podcast, is relationships win the day. And that's true. That was my experience on the other side of things as well. And lo and behold, you get a contract for a year after that. Very interesting. So you're splitting your time between you're running this big business, services business, selling to the government and helping people. And you're also helping small businesses as a consultant. And we have people that are in that field too, kind of listening to the podcast. What's your advice for them, and which one do you like more? what gives you more, reward at the end of the day?
It's really hard to answer that.
Yeah.
Because it constantly changes. I love just helping. Like my why is helping. And that's something that's super important for anyone in government contracting, is to be very open and honest about your why.
Right.
And if your why is like, I just want to make a bunch of money, okay, cool. If your why is because you want to employ your cousins, okay, cool. My why was, I was like, oh, this is great. I get to take what I've been doing and do more of it and help more people. And so my why has always been helping. So on the GovCon winners side, I adore it because it's helping people who really need assistance navigating, introducing them to this space. And it also has taught me a lot about people who are coachable and about different skill sets that are needed that are outside of like, how do I read this RFP? There's also just business skills that are absent. So like, for instance, I had heard just even before I even knew what like 8A was, because we are a graduate of that. But I would hear people say things like, oh God, 8As, or these businesses, we don't like working with them. Why can't we just give everything to, fill in the blank of a big company, right?
Yeah.
And again, I was head in the clouds, like didn't know. I had no idea. Yeah. So as time has gone on, and especially after forming GovCon winners, it's like, oh, I get it. Because the thing that's super important, even outside of sales and being in SAM and, knowing what the government buys, is understanding business.
Sure.
Business, client relations. And so now it makes sense why a vast majority of small businesses don't make over 250, why you have a ton of 8As that never get contracts, because that's missing. And then the people or the companies who get it, they get it. Like I just talked to a gentleman where they were growing their company. They were really growing through National Guard, and somehow they got connected to a national Hawaiian organization, and they bought 51%, and now they're doing like $100 million a year or something, because NHOs and Alaskan Natives can be sole source, $100 million by the DoD.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, makes sense why somebody would buy into it, because I'm assuming they had a lot of the business set up there, all the business basics. But the point is, they understand it. You have people and companies like that example who realize the upside of government contracting. And then you have those that they hear it, they see it, but they're missing the business acumen to even figure out how to get the plane off the runway. It's not even on the runway. It's like the plane is, I don't even know where the plane is. It's like in a ditch.
I feel like there's a lot of misinformation out there. I think what you were saying is, when you first started saying, the people that were saying, 8A companies, were you talking about the government saying that about 8A companies, or the 8A companies and the
government?
Yeah.
And when I say the government, all levels, and it's like, yeah, it wasn't one particular type or not. And also, it was all different kinds of people, how they looked and talked. So I want to put that out there. It was just
racist or anything.
No, it's not. It was just, people were like, oh gosh. And then, I was again like, oh, I don't understand.
Yeah.
Had no clue.
I think a lot of the companies that, like you mentioned, they don't have the acumen. I think there's some false narratives out there, right? Like, so people will come and ask, hey, I want to get started, but I need to get my WOSB first, or I need to get my 8A first. And this is my response is, I have never, on the government side, I have never hired a company because they had a certification, ever, right? It's always about the mission. And do you understand my office? Do you understand what our mission is? Do you understand the requirements? Do you have a proven track record of answering those requirements? Am I confident that you can do what I need you to do? That's number one. And then on top, if you are 8A or you have one of those certifications, well, now that's great. That's icing on the cake, because if you are 8A now, maybe I can sole source a contract to you, or Alaska Native or something, or maybe we can set it aside and, we can meet some other type of requirements. But the biggest requirement is always the mission and what the government needs. And all of these other parameters, certifications are nice to have. But I feel like, to your point, I think a lot of the companies, or some of the companies at least, that go out and grab those certifications think, I'm going to get 8A or WOSB or SDVOSB, and then the contracts are just going to fall in my lap. And they don't understand, A, business, but B, government business. That's something you have to spend time learning how to do, or hire somebody that can do it for you and teach you along the way. But I think that is a big problem.
It is. And the thing is, it's doable.
Yeah, it is.
Like, if I was able to do it, and I was a mess.
I don't know anyone's going to believe that you were.
No, I was. Remember,
Dr. Parks.
Where my bed came out the wall. I was even getting cash advances as Dr. Parks. Stuff was bad. Like, there was so much I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so it's like, and I came through it. There was a point in time I was tempted to sell ownership because I was in such a bad place. And I thought, oh, well, this will be the solution. And thankfully I didn't do that, because it turned out, a lot of things came to surface from that. But I got through it. I got through it with mentors. I got through it with different paid and free programs. And I just kept persevering. And I think of it now as like, okay, that's kind of like the appetizer of my business life. Because it did. Luckily it happened so early on. I'm aging in reverse, but it happened early on in life. I was 12. And so, but yeah, it's definitely doable, but you got to be willing to do it. And those who are willing, you're going to skyrocket. And those who are just like, whatever, doesn't matter, then what's going to happen is, as soon as you get in that door, that agency is going to think about, how do we get rid of them?
Sure. Well, and there's some mechanisms that the government can take if you don't do a good job. that will make it hard for you to ever win a contract again. So you have to make sure, and I mean, I guess another example would be biting off more than you can chew, right? Is, hey, you win a contract that's too big for you to handle with the current size of your business. That could also have very negative consequences on how you move forward. So I mean, there's a lot of thought there, but I do think it's doable. I agree, and I think it's what we try to teach is that the FAR, like you were saying, when you started off about how much there's so much information out there. If you think about like just acquisitions, I just think about the careers in acquisitions, right? So I think about the contracting officer and the program manager and the engineer and the finance people, and Defense Acquisitions University and all of the different courses that you have people spending 20, 30 years learning a piece of the FAR. But for the businesses out there, they don't have to learn all that stuff. They just have to learn how the government buys what they sell and how they can fulfill that to the government. You just have to learn your little piece, but you have to put the work in to understand that little piece so you can be successful.
Yeah. And to deliver it the best, make sure you understand invoicing. I mean, even that I think is an area that is so overlooked and never talked about. There's like this assumption like, oh, I'm just magically money is going to come out and pay my invoice. And it's like, if you're getting paid by the Department of Defense, it's a whole thing to get into wide area workflow, which is through Pi. And then you have to make sure the information in the system matches your contract. And if Betty Sue plays a role, you better get to know Betty Sue, because if she's not at work, your invoice. I mean, it's like, it's a lot. And it's like, it's important to know, because then that way you can forecast for your cash flow. You have a realistic idea of just how things work. It allows you to practice more client relations, and it shows that you're managing your contract. Because I even had a mentor who had way more experience than I, and they took a different approach. They were very hands off with their accounts receivables, and we're not like that. And I don't, and it's something I also coach on, is as soon as you win a contract, it's one of the first things to discuss in your kickoff meeting, is because even though they'll outline, here's how we're going to pay you, there's this thing called preference.
Yep.
And we once had an agency that said, I understand that legally, if it's under $75, for travel, I don't need a receipt, but I need a receipt for everything. And I was like, okay, preference. There's another agency. Hey, we just want you to know that while it's firm fixed price and, hours, we want you to separate your invoice this way. Preference.
Yeah.
And so if you say, well, that's not what the contract says, then now you're putting up this wall that's unnecessary. And they're going to start to think like, oh, you're a pain to work with. Why are you acting like this? And then it's like, but then you may think, well, but that's it. Got it. Sometimes you got to give in to preference, as long as you have these conversations early. So then that way you can adapt, opposed to, oh, I submitted my invoice. How much? I didn't get paid yet. Where's my money? And I mean, then it's, because that I know has led to a lot of issues. I've had people from the government talk about that as a pain point. And it was something that, I even had to learn. I had invoices stuck for months because I didn't understand.
Yeah, that's the government's the 900-pound gorilla in the room, and they're always going to win. So, I mean, whether it's, I guess, and this is a conversation, it sounds like you have them with your clients as well, is, especially with something like services, you got to pay your employees, right? Well, the government's not going to pay you. You have to have money to pay these people while you're waiting to get paid. You could have a 90-day turnaround very easily from when you invoice to when you get paid. And that's without anything happening on the Congress side of things, affecting the year. And of course, we've had people on the podcast. There are financial houses that specialize in just funding companies that have government contracts. But if you're not aware of that going into it, like, that's what you need to have set up. You have to, because once you have the contract, you can get those agreements where you can receive funding, you can pay your people, and they loan you the money so you can. But you got to know what you're doing there, or have the money in house, right, to pay everybody. So that's a huge thing. The government can also terminate a contract for convenience, right? And a lot of people are unaware of that. So what do you do if we had a client, Lindsay, and she's supposed to be on the podcast coming up here, but basically, and she helps a lot of vets. She has a great company, and she had a contract with the Navy, and they terminated the contract for convenience, and it was just a one-day moving thing. But for her business, that was a good amount of money, right? And she showed up. She was there that morning. They canceled that morning, right? So she came to us. She's like, I just don't know what to do. I'm out all this. I'm like, you're not out all of that. Because even though the government could terminate for convenience, now we can generate an official response to the government. The government knows they have to pay you for the time that you've already put into this, right? So although you probably won't get the full contract price, she got almost the full contract price after but I mean, that's what you got to know. You can respond to something like that. And the government, usually people on that side are fair, right? So, and you mentioned preference. Someone might ask you for receipts. I mean, it's good just to be very precise, keep records of everything, over deliver if it makes sense to do that. And then depending on who the PM is that your contracting officer is that you're working with, you should be able to pivot to what they need and what they want.
Yeah. It's vital, because if not, then it's like a going out of business strategy.
Oh, yeah.
It's just, it truly is.
Absolutely. Let's talk about, I didn't intend to go here, but you brought it up at the beginning, and I had a conversation with a retired colonel that I used to work with, and I saw him at a conference, but he was going through what his post-military career looked like, right? And he's not in the business of selling anything to the government or anything, but he's worked for a lot of small businesses that have had these contracts, staffing contracts and subcontracting contracts. But they would be going year to year. A lot of these businesses were like, he'd be like, hey, I'd be working for him, for a year, and then the contract didn't go through with the government. They didn't get, the option year, or so now he needs a new job, right? Or what advice would you give to people that are kind of in that realm where they like working for the government? They're working for a contractor or a subcontractor as an employee. Is there anything that they should be thinking of before they take a job, before they go down that route? Would you advise them to look at government service, being a GS, or should they stick with contracting, subcontracting? Is there a plus and minus in your view to either of those paths?
Yeah. The plus that I think is the biggest one is you're eligible at some point for a pension.
Yeah.
I mean, there are very few organizations out there who offer a pension.
Sure.
Very, very few. I mean, I learned that there's certain state jobs across America that don't even offer a pension. I was like, whoa,
Yeah.
I had no idea about that. So that's number one, is you have a pension, whether you're like a GS7 or you're an, SES, like you're getting this pension. So the other thing I've found that's really cool about it, and I think about, we've had several who have transitioned from working for us to taking on a government role. And we've had the opposite. Mm-hmm. We've had those leave the government to become contractors. So the other thing is, many like the stability. They're not concerned about, is this contract going to continue? They really like that. They like, the 1st and 15th pay. They enjoy being part of the in-group per se, right? Because as contractors, we're always out-group. We're always, I always say we're visiting. We're like the people visiting the home, right? So we're always visiting, and they want to be part of the in-group. Then there are those who, many of them are interested in leveraging that to then potentially go to other agencies, because it's, especially for non-vets, this is where I've seen it work the best. We've had both vets and non-vets get into different government roles as contractors. And it's extremely challenging to obtain a government role if you're not a veteran, and it should be, right? Because that's the rules, that's the law. It makes sense. So, but once you get in, you're like in. Then you can go work wherever. You can apply for that job for a different agency or try and move somewhere else. And so that's what it gives people who are able to come in as a contractor, because not only do you get in with that agency that maybe you've been contracting with for 7 months or 10 years, but now it's like, oh, I'm eligible to apply for all these different positions where before you couldn't apply for them on USA Jobs.
Yep.
And so that's another benefit. The other one is, and I know this varies, and so I always encourage people to check it out, tuition reimbursement. There's some agencies that pay a lot more than others.
Yep.
And it is something you can negotiate. I know that the director of research, I think under the Air Force, he got basically all of his college repaid. Then there are those who maybe received a much lower amount. Mm-hmm. It all varies.
Sure.
But that's another cool benefit. Another benefit, depending on the level you come in at, is there are agencies who will pay for you to receive additional education, certification. So I have a colleague who also has a PhD in the same field as I, and she worked for several agencies, and she just would go to all of these different trainings and picked up all of these different certifications because that was an area she really wanted to grow. And the best part is she didn't have to pay for any of them because they were related to her job and added value to her as a civilian employee. So there's a lot of upside there. I mean, the downside is then you got to deal with the bureaucracy of being an employee opposed to being an employee or a contractor to a government contractor. So there are some who don't like that. There are some who maybe that position didn't turn out to be exactly what they wanted. There could be times where the stakeholders who brought you in, maybe they leave or retire. So, there is definitely something to weigh, but I encourage it. I think it's amazing. I think it's a great opportunity because, again, who else is going to give you a pension?
Yeah, no, there's certainly a lot of upside to working for the government. But I do think there's upside to being a contractor as well, or working like for a company like yours, because, just like you mentioned, the bureaucracy, it gives you the ability to be part of a team and to see if you even like that team, right? And maybe if you haven't been on the government side, you don't realize a lot of the forced fun and forced training activities that you're going to have. So some of that training is really great. Some of it's not. Some of the reimbursement programs are amazing, right? But I guess it's being able to experience it without having to make the commitment that you would have to make on the government side is one of the big advantages. And in some cases, it's also pay, right? So depending on what the job is, you could be getting paid a lot more as a contractor than you could as, and I can remember because, part of my job was just putting people on contract, right, that were supporting us mainly in research areas, right? And depending on what your area of expertise is, some of these really high-end engineering services were extremely high on a yearly salary side, for what we were paying. So there is an opportunity there as well.
Yeah, there definitely is.
Very cool. Very cool. This is great. I mean, we've been at this here for almost an hour now. Everything that you say is always appreciated by me and the audience. Is there anything you'd like to leave anyone with today? Any special message, or maybe where they can go get you again?
Check me out on govconwinners.com. Sign up for the wait list. Send you information, invite you to our Facebook group. Check out my YouTube channel, Kizzy Parks. I'd love for you to check it out, like the videos, subscribe, share. Message to leave you with is it's just not a race. It's not a race. It is something where it's like an ultra marathon, but it will pay off. I've come across those who it took them a year to get their first contract. I've come across those who they started off their business with a partner and then it ended up not turning out well and they had to buy the partner out, but then they grew a $20 million business on their own. There are those who get in and then they decide, you know what, I really want to work for a contractor or I want to work for the government. And so what's great is you have options just to stick with it. And most importantly, you also have us as resources. So you're not alone. You're not on your own like island and there's no one to help you out with anything. We're here to help out. So just, connect with both of us and just, stay positive throughout it.
Oh yeah, no, that's it. Keep up the fight, be consistent, know what you're doing. Awesome conversation. Thank you again for everyone listening. Check out the notes. I'm going to have links to all Kizzy's stuff that she mentioned here in the podcast. Check her out at YouTube and her website. And listen up. We're looking forward to next week's podcast, and we'll see you then.